The Glass Castle was published in 2005, and it's a memoir by Jeannette Walls. In the book, Jeannette recounts her dysfunctional and nomadic upbringing with her alcoholic father and free-spirited mother, along with her older sister, younger brother, and youngest sister.
The Glass Castle is a remarkable memoir of resilience and redemption, and a revelatory look into a family at once deeply dysfunctional and uniquely vibrant. When sober, Jeannette's brilliant and charismatic father captured his children's imagination, teaching them physics, geology, and how to embrace life fearlessly. But when he drank, he was dishonest and destructive. Her mother was a free spirit who abhorred the idea of domesticity and didn't want the responsibility of raising a family.
The Walls children learned to take care of themselves. They fed, clothed, and protected one another, and eventually found their way to New York. Their parents followed them, choosing to be homeless even as their children prospered. So how did the book make you feel?
Honestly, after reading the book, I felt like I was left with a lot of mixed emotions, but all of them were pretty negative. There were parts of the book that made me really sad, and then parts that were just super disappointing, and other parts made me really angry.
Me too. I was all negative feelings. I was really disgusted with her parents, the characters, the way people treated them. It was just it just made me so angry that people live like this and that their parents could have changed it and chose not to. So it was just mostly anger and disgust.
Yeah, and then a lot of the sadness is just for Jeannette and for their family. It's anger about the situation and the things she was put through.
Yeah.
Especially at such a young age. I think once you kind of get into the book, you tend to forget that how young she was at the start of everything and how young she was when she went through some of the most traumatic moments of her life. And it's just crazy to think that a parent could put someone through that.
Yeah. It also kind of upset me that no one really tried to help them, and when they did, their parents were like, oh, we don't take free handouts.
I agree.
And it's you'd rather let your children go hungry than hurt your pride just a little bit for getting food. And it's really annoying. And it's also was upsetting that people were making fun of them for something they couldn't control because they were little kids. They couldn't do anything about it. And it kind of just, I feel that relates to society today. Because people still you can't change the fact if you're poor because you're a child and people will make fun of you for it. So another important part of the book was definitely their education, because even though they were always moving around and didn't have money at all during the book, their education was still important to them, and they got a good education that their parents kind of made an important part of their lives, even though that's the only thing they made important and put effort into with the children.
Yeah, it was definitely interesting to see what they prioritized for their kids, but I am glad that education was something that they cared about for their children. I think that honestly set them up for success in breaking the cycle later on that they were stuck in, because they were able to get into college and get better jobs because of the knowledge that they came from. But as a kid, they talk about how in the book their father taught them a lot of things. I think at some points what he was teaching them was kind of useless to them at that point in time. They were never really going to use it. But just their reading, their writing, their speaking skills definitely set them up for success in school.
Yeah. One thing I during the book while I was thinking their parents are teaching them, but I was but how good are their education do the parents have, and is what they're teaching actually good and helping them with their education? It was just a thought in the back of my head. I was okay, but are they smart? Because it seems they were smart, but they kept making bad choices and didn't really do much with their education or their personal intelligence.
I think you could probably assume that their mom had a good education just with the background she came from.
Yeah.
And then you learn more about their father, Rex's background, because they end up moving in with his family, and I think you definitely could assume his education was not on par. I mean, the kids end up going to the local school there, and they find some problems because even though they are genuinely gifted children, I mean, they're high above reading and speaking and learning levels for their ages, but because that they were poor and because they were living in poverty and how they looked, how they dressed, the fact that they were outsiders to the town, there was a lot of stigma around that, and their principal thought they were dumb, and he didn't really care to find out.
Which is also, I feel something that's common, you look like you're not smart or don't have any intelligence, and that's it's bad. But one thing about the education also with them looking differently is just the way they treated them. They the other kids, they were constantly getting in fights, getting bullied on. But one thing I did like about, like, there's certain schools is how the teachers would help them, like, help them with, sometimes give them clothes or food, and, like, didn't judge them for it, which is nice because, I mean, some teachers, it's not their job to make sure that kids are eating or clothed, but it's, like, it was a heartwarming part in this very negative book.
Especially since the kids themselves deal with so much backlash from the other children. It was nice to see that almost everywhere they went, the teachers, at least one of them everywhere, really did support them and either saw that they were gifted and wanted to help them excel and challenge them, or they, even if they didn't think that way, they wanted to help them hands-on to get them to where they needed to be. So that was nice. And like Koryn said, there was teachers who wanted to help them with food and clothes. Even if their parents denied that help, there still were people reaching out. So yeah, that was, like Koryn said, a very heartwarming part of the book. As we were reading through the book, there definitely were some more sensitive topics, including sexual violence and assault, especially that Jeannette went through more than anybody else. But there were quite a few instances that definitely left us just heartbroken for Jeannette.
Yeah, it was really crazy, especially when it was from, like, a family member. Like, her uncle would touch her, or the grandma was touching her brother. And it was just something that she experienced from a really early age. Like, there was one boy who tried to kiss her and then went around saying that he raped her. And it's just, like, she didn't even know what that was at that point. And one of the most frustrating parts was she went and asked her dad about it. And he wasn't even, like, concerned. Like, why is my young daughter bringing this up to me? Like, where did she learn this?
I think that's one of the most frustrating parts of the book for both of us, is seeing that time and time again after she's experiencing this assault and this violence. Every time she reaches out for help or even tries to advocate for herself at all, she's shut down, she's not seen, she's not heard or validated. And so I can't even imagine the effect that would have on her as she grows up. Like, if something were to happen to her again, how would she even handle it when all she's learned is just to be quiet about it, and it's not that big of a deal.
Yeah. Especially there's the part where her dad took her to the bar to, like, help him get money, and there's a bunch of these, like, old men sitting by her trying to dance, and she, like, went with it because she was like, my dad's right there, he'll save me. But then she went upstairs with the guy, and then, like, he tried to touch her and, like, did, and then she was scared to tell her dad, but she was like, no, this guy deserves to be hurt, and she told her dad, and it was like he didn't even care about it.
Yeah, and I think that's a big part of where her disappointment in her dad starts, because she used to be able to rely on him, and she thought she could come to him to save her, like Koryn said, but that is a big moment where she realizes she can't rely on him like she thought she could.
Because he was her hero, and that was just kind of the breaking point where she was like, no, he's not a hero, he's not gonna put myself first, because he didn't. He was putting the money first that he was going to spend on himself, not even their family.
It's very depressing to see such a vulnerable kid go through so many things simply because of that, and for her to never get help, for her to never be validated. Experiencing that trauma has to be horrible, and then again, like, never getting help, never feeling seen. I can't even imagine what that would be like.
I feel like she didn't talk about it enough. Like, it happened so many times, but, like, I feel like she didn't really, like, pause and think about it. She just continued because no one showed any concern for her or was like, why did this happen? And she just, like, kept going on. Or I feel like there should have been, like, a point where she was like, that was unfair that happened to me.
I agree.
And, like, I kept waiting for that point, or for her to, like, call them out and be like, kind of just, like, reflect on it, and it never really happened.
It's definitely depressing because, I mean, as you're reading, you're just waiting and waiting and waiting for her to get justice, waiting for her to have this comeback, and you never get it. She never gets that. So that's definitely very sad.
It was definitely the most, like, frustrating and disgusted part of the book, was just with all of it.
Absolutely. One of the most liberating parts of the book, I thought, is when all the children end up moving away to New York, and seeing them connect with each other and kind of be able to be their own little family again without the hardships that were being put on them by their parents was very nice to see. You can see them start to break the cycle a lot.
That, for me too, I agree. Just them breaking the cycle, because many people don't get to break the cycle, and they're stuck in the habits, and they don't get to have a different life. They're just stuck. And I feel like all the kids, except for Maureen, were able to get out and kind of start their new life, but started it together, and they still could rely on each other, but they didn't have to. And they chose to be different than their parents, and they all had good jobs, had new families, and they were happy.
I think one of the biggest reasons they were able to do that is because of the boundaries they put up. Koryn mentioned earlier when Brian kind of puts up some boundaries with his father, even though at this point Brian's grown, he has his own family. His father's still coming around asking for help, kind of loitering off of them, and he puts boundaries in place with him, and it upsets his father, but that's the kind of things that he needed to be able to grow and become healthy.
Yeah, they put up boundaries, and it got better, because I feel like throughout the book, even the kids were making excuses for their parents, and once they left, they kind of were like, okay, enough. It did frustrate me when the parents followed them to New York, just because I feel like the kids finally got free, and then they came, and then they had to take care of their parents. Like, they lived with each of them for a little bit, and, like, we're always asking for stuff. Like, the dad asked her to come over, and she brought a big thing of vodka for him, like...
I think that definitely solidifies the idea that the parents really were going through the things they were going through by choice. Once arriving in New York, I mean, the kids tried to find concrete living situations and jobs and financial supports for them, and they refused it every time. There was never a time where the parents were grateful for their help or their support. It's simply they were ashamed of needing it, and so they didn't want to take it, and they chose to be homeless.
Yeah. See, in my mind, I feel like they're more snobby than ashamed. Like, they think they're higher up than, like, people who need to go to, like, a soup kitchen or, like, go sleep in a church for the night. Like, it just seemed like they thought they were above that and better than everyone else, but they were in the same situation, and they should have been ashamed, and it felt like they really weren't as ashamed as they should be. Like, they were horrible. Their children had horrible lives, and they, like, I don't think they felt bad for it at all.
I think their egos were a giant part of their downfall. I mean, if they just had opened their hearts to having a different life or recognizing where they went wrong at any point, I feel like there's times in the book where both the mom and the dad recognize that the way they're living right now is not healthy, it's not successful, but instead of wanting to be better, they simply wallow in their pity and their being upset, and they never progress.
Yeah, no, and it was really frustrating just to see that, or when anything bad happened, they just got up and left and went on a new adventure.
Like we said, we're very glad all the children were able to, form a support circle for themselves and create good lives, or at least ones that they're happy with, despite all the things they went through. But as we said earlier, Maureen kind of takes a different path on life.
Yeah.
She ends up running away to California and isn't really in contact with any of her family.
And she stabbed the mom at one point.
Yeah. We think that this is partially because of the fact that the kids kind of grew up with different phases of their parents. When the older children grew up, their parents, I think, although they weren't necessarily stable, they were a lot more driven. I think they cared a lot more about their kids. But by the time that Maureen was growing up and these experiences were really going to have an effect on her, her parents were in a very bad place. Her family was in a very bad place.
Yeah.
This is an interview with Miss Roth about the Glass Castle.
Yes, perfect.
Do you want to go first?
Yeah, so after reading this book, how did it affect you or make you feel?
It definitely made me feel really sad. I think I already knew, being a teacher, I feel like I know a lot about kids who are in situations like this person was. Jeannette, right?
Yeah.
I think that's her name. So it really just more reaffirmed what I already knew about people in situations like this. So it definitely broke my heart, made me feel bad for her, but also just very much solidified that we need to be doing more for people in situations like this and being more aware of how we can help people.
What was a specific scene that stood out to you or made you the saddest?
Probably when it was the one where they're living in a house on the side of a mountain, and the house is basically falling apart around them, and she's doing everything she can to make this house more attractive and make it feel like a home, and her parents are just oh no, it's fine. The other scene that really made me feel mad was when you found out the mom had potentially all this money and they could have been living a life of luxury or at least comfort. And instead they're living in this dilapidated house on this hill and they're freezing and they don't have food half the time. So I'd say those two scenes kind of go together for me, was that like seeing the house and knowing that they had money, that they didn't have to live like that.
Yeah.
And I think you find out at the end that like her mom owned a lot of land,
Yeah.
like millions of dollars worth of land,
Yes.
and she had no reason to keep it. It wasn't being utilized, but it had to stay in the family.
Yes.
Yeah. That also. I think the mom was my least favorite character.
Yes. Yeah.
She was bad.
As a teacher, do you see any relevance to this story today in our school?
Oh, for sure. I mean, I'm not going to say names, but I had a student living with me last year who their parents' home was not safe. The adopted family they lived with was not willing to keep them anymore. So I've personally experienced having someone live with me because their home life was not okay.
Yeah.
I have kids come to me all the time telling me like, hey, I'm hungry, or like we had like Project Rise for years. So I would say I see that very much still on a regular basis, even though I think the author is like in her 40s now.
Yeah.
I definitely see this as still being very relevant to kids today.
Yeah.
Do you think that this book is controversial or appropriate for high schoolers with like its alcoholism,
I'm probably the wrong person to ask this because I don't. I'm very much against censorship, and I very much think that, especially at the high school level, kids should be reading stuff about the real world. They should be made aware of stuff like this, but I also think that kids should be able to pick what they want to read. Because this is a book I never would have picked up a million years of my life. Like, never would have picked it up. Because it's not something I enjoy reading, but I see the importance of reading stuff like this. So, I always ask myself, like, okay, do my high schoolers, or even our elementary kids, but do our high schoolers deal with parents who are alcoholics? Yeah. So why would reading a book about it be any different? Do we have kids who are dealing with sexual assault or food negligence or just negligence in general? Yeah. So why would reading a book about it not be important? Because either it's going to make kids be aware, feel empathy, or at least be like, oh my God, it's not just me. Like, there are other people out there that live just like me, and it's not normal. It's not okay. And they can reach for more or find support paths to help them get out of these situations. So I would say it's 100% important for kids to read books like this.
I agree. I feel like sometimes they're trying to shelter kids from these things, but when you're already experiencing it, it's just enhancing the stigma that's already around it.
And I feel like in Charles City, people don't realize like how many kids do suffer with those problems or like don't have food to eat, so it's kind of more eye-opening too.
And I think about that, like, again, the idea that they're sheltering kids is so important, but for kids who don't face neglect, food insecurity, abuse of any kind, it's so important for us to realize, like, there are people that actually live, like, it's not just a TV caricature kind of thing. It's very much the kids in the room next to us. And it builds that empathy and eye-opening concepts that we need people to feel. Like, we shouldn't be living in a world where people are like, well, I don't care if you're like starving every day as long as I get mine. Like, that's I think very heartbreaking that we would live in a world like that.
Well, that's all we have for you today. Thank you so much.
Happy to help.
Koryn and I are here with
Robert Pittman.
Okay, Mr. Pittman. After reading The Glass Castle, how did this book affect you or make you feel?
It really kind of brought me back to my early days when I was a kid in Wyoming. And when my family moved there from California to Wyoming, we lived in a trailer for 2 years. And, my mom and dad struggled to get their business started. And then also what it really brought up was after my dad died, and then my mom and I moved to Iowa, like some of the things that they kind of experienced of living hand to mouth, like that was a little bit of my childhood that we had, and, I enjoyed that. Then as a teacher, and a humanist, just seeing and hearing that kind of story and to the extremes that it went and how somebody overcame that, I think has tons of value for anybody.
Yeah, that's very impactful.
Which part of the book made you the saddest or like really stuck out to you?
I would say the stuff that she had as an adult where she had to deal with her parents struggling was sad.
Yeah.
You know, because you gotta, like, you know, is your fate set? Or do you get to decide it? And, like, you know, she changed her fate, but yet she couldn't do anything to help her parents.
Yeah.
And to let it go and surrender that is a hard thing to do.
Yeah.
It's a great take. As a teacher, you kind of touched on this, but do you see any relevance to the story today or in our school?
Yeah, I think every teacher should be aware of these kind of stories, because this is some of the stuff that kids in high school go through. You know, I forget the exact statistic, but I think it's like 1 in 10 kids in Iowa are couch surf. You know, they are technically homeless. You know, I always will remember the day when National Geographic, maybe 16, 15 years ago, did a special on hunger in America, and on the front page was a girl that was in the Girl Scout troop that my wife was the scout leader for. You know, I mean, there are places the county we live in, we have food issues. You know, if you think about like all of the different programs that we have to get extra food to kids and how much it's needed. You know, I think my wife gives out something like over the weekend, something like 50 bags of food to just kids in the middle school. You know, so there's about 12 to 15 for each grade level that they need help.
Wow.
Yeah.
Do you think this book...
All that thought. Teachers need to be more understanding.
Yes.
You know, and I think this really this book highlights that idea.
Yes. Good. Do you think this book is controversial or appropriate for high schoolers to read?
I think all literature is appropriate for high school to read. You know, there's maybe like, have you guys ever read The Clockwork Orange? Like, that one would be hard. Reading Lolita, probably not for high school, right? But like this one, I mean, it is a truthful account that shows like how hard it is to move up economically in America.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's not sensationalist, it's not gratuitous, it's like, this is what happened in my life.
Yeah.
You know, it'd be like somebody saying, oh, you know, this kid was born to some crack addicts and she got sold into slavery as like a sex slave in America, and no, you shouldn't read that because that's inappropriate. No, that's something that like you need to know about. You know, it'd be like I'm teaching about child soldiers and what they go through. To be like, no, you can't teach that. That would be stupid, right?
Yeah, because
Right.
it makes people more aware.
Yeah, and Americans need to be more aware.
Yeah.
I agree. Well, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah.
It was my pleasure. You guys have a great day.
You too, thank you.
Those were our interviews with Mr. Pittman and Miss Roth. It was really nice to interview teachers in our school who have read the book because they have seen kids in that situation and with parents like that, so it was nice to see how they felt over the book and some of the scenes within the book.
Overall, Koryn and I really enjoyed getting this chance to read this book and gaining a new perspective. It definitely has some valuable information and gives you things to think about.